Okay, good afternoon. I'm going to share with you a survey done by the Global Network of Directors Institute in August 2023. And this Global Network of Directors Institute represents 21 Directors Institute, about 150,000 directors globally. Now in this survey, it is interesting. 66% of the respondents consider the need for a long-term, robust strategy in an environment dominated by short-term pressures as the most important priority for organization success. But when it comes to climate, it's not a top priority. In fact, only 5% of the respondents believe climate change is on the top list for organizational success. And this is, despite the fact that we have, growing regulatory focus and, this growing concern of existential risk. Then we look at the S and the G. Only 27% of the respondents consider a lack of deliberation and focus on social and environmental issue a current governance practice that would be less acceptable in the medium term. So the truth here is we have these regulatory pressures. Investors, Prue has shared how the investors think. And the board appears to only act to satisfy regulatory disclosure requirements. Beyond that, it's all lip service. Nothing really great is done on ESG, to act on it. And you just shared, Prue, that investors also think this way, that if it is a positive impact on cash flow, yes, go ahead and do it. If it's negative impact on cash flow, please don't do anything. Is that how the state of affairs?
I think it really depends on the type of company and the ownership structure. When I've had 10 years at BlackRock as head of investment stewardship and spoke to a lot of companies that had block shareholder, generally family, and they didn't really care about ESG. They may have held, let's say, 60%. They're not selling in the short term. They have no issues when it comes to voting against, if the institutional investors vote against the directors because they've got 60%, so all their directors that they've put on the board are re-elected. They didn't really care, particularly around governance issues, and I would meet with them saying, we'd like some more disclosure around the diversity on your board, or your more disclosure around your nomination process, so we would want to make sure that there were competent people on that board. The reaction was, well, nobody else ever asked those questions, so we're not going to respond. But I think things have moved a bit, and they're right. They don't have to worry about those questions, and they're not particularly worried about the share price not having a 10 or 15% premium. Often families in charge in terms of CEO, you don't have an external person that might have their remuneration based on financial performance, for argument's sake. But those companies are now being the subject of social activism, and that was one of the points that I was talking about beforehand. And I think this goes to the core of reputation. It will impact on share price, again, probably something they're not too worried about, but it's that core to reputation, and this is where they need to I think, do more work and be more transparent. But it's only on those issues that are material. And I think too many companies are ESG, and there's a laundry list of things, and if you look at the GRI, what the GRI wants you to disclose, there's, I think, 400 items to disclose in there. That's not what investors are after. They're after information on material issues that are likely to impact future cash flows, which they will factor into their models. The activists aren't interested in your external reporting, but what are you doing in terms of land clearing, in terms of Indigenous rights? It are these issues that, if they're not managed well, will go to the core of reputation, which won't just be, it'll have more damage than just the share price.
So we are still in this old mindset of being very practical, right? And Eric, I like your piece that was published in our Business Times. It's about our listed companies have a lot to learn from your bakery shop. And I think you are right to say that in a world together, many of us train in an Adam Smith mindset of industrial efficiency. It is not easy for us to break out of this concept of, driving industrial efficiency at the expense of ESG factors. I'd like your views on this.
Yeah. Well, so when you look at ESG, there are several ways to look at it. You can look at it from the regulatory perspective, like, they have to disclose all this information, and what they do is basically they tick boxes, and then the report will be published, and nobody's going to look at it, but at least they comply.
Yeah.
But for many companies these days, they realize that ESG is becoming strategic. And that's where that piece came from. So Nike was mentioned. I think in the sports industry, there are many smaller companies that actually do really well and might outperform Nike in the future, because the younger generation don't like Nike, but they want to have Gymshark, a UK company. And the reason it's not listed, but they do a lot on ESG. So they disclose information, what investors actually want. 10 pages on what they do. They have the whole supply chain there. They say, well, we are transparent, but we know that we are not there yet, but we want to improve. And they see ESG as a stakeholder involvement idea. So they use the consumer becomes actually a co-creator of them. And if you do that, the consumer wants to know more about the company. So if you look at Gymshark and compare that to Nike, so Nike is disclosing just the information that they want. Gymshark's CEO has a YouTube channel, basically saying what is it like to be a CEO these days. And the consumer wants to know that because it gives them a feeling that they belong to that company. So when you look at the gym, the younger generation, and also people like me want to be young, we wear Gymshark. Because at least we feel connected to this company. Why? Because of ESG, and the CEO actually says that in a YouTube video where he is introducing a new board member, Gary Vaynerchuk, an American, where he says, well, in the sports industry, the sports and apparel, like shoes and apparel industry, it's all about ESG. That's where the consumer will make the choices. For investors, extremely important, because at least this is a company that will remain relevant in the future. So I think there's a lot to learn from these younger companies that are not obliged to disclose, but actually do it. So we have Gymshark. Patagonia is another one. However, they made a mistake. So the question then is, how do they react to mistakes? We have this chocolate company in the Netherlands, Tony Chocolonely. Again, it's all about ESG. ESG is what they sell. The chocolate is not really good, but I like the chocolate because it's this ESG experience. So everybody in the Netherlands wants to buy Tony Chocolonely. And the interesting thing is, yesterday, I just came out of the plane and I needed my Coke, so I went to 7-Eleven. I came in, the first thing I saw was Tony Chocolonely. So I thought, oh yeah, they are here as well. And it's these companies that understand that ESG is not just something that you have to comply with, but it becomes part of the strategy, and I think these companies are the winners. Now, Signify, I just received the email, and I do this without glasses, that's not really smart. But I have somebody here next to me, and they, oh God, I can make it bigger. So what they said, I have to scroll up. Press release, Signify accelerates the transition to energy-efficient lighting with the new ultra-efficient lamps for roads, retail, hospitality, and more. Now the thing is that these lamps are co-created with the consumers. So that's why I think we're at board level, I agree with you, shareholder, stakeholder involved. That's an whole discussion. I see your point, but I think stakeholders, some of them become partners and then really relevant in board discussions as well, because that's where the new products come from. So I think the companies that see ESG not just as a compliance issue, but as a strategic issue and a focus on the materiality, which can change over time, they will be the winners. And they provide the information that everybody can understand.
But you're also coming through the investor lens, so it's going to lead to longer-term sustainable returns.
Yeah.
So I think we're absolutely on the same page.
Yeah, we are.
Yep,
No, we are actually.
yep,
That's why
yep.
I say we
so
are.
you're not doing it you're not going into ESG as a cost.
No.
Well, our return's going to be lower because we're donating $1 million a year to something that's not particularly important.
So Eric, your point is the consumers have a preference, and that preference is on ESG chocolates.
Well, in certain industries, yes, because
Yeah.
the consumer is not interested in the product anymore. The
That's
consumer
right,
is not interested in the service. It's all about the whole experience.
Yes.
And the company wants to know, the consumer wants to know more, but also the investor. It's basically on the same page.
Yeah.
They also want to know more about the culture of the company instead of just what's your profitability. That's the same thing. So when you make an investment, these are the companies in the long term that win. And yes, my bakery, I use that in this newspaper article because that existed for 148 years. If you look at their business model, it's ESG because it was a biological bakery. We knew everything. We, the consumer, like to be there in the morning to talk to other consumers about the bread and where it came from. And we knew the local producers. Basically, that was ESG, but then like in a very local, small way. And I think if big companies understand that thinking, and some do, but some also, as you pointed out, don't, but they should change their mindset. And I think in the board, they should have that discussion. Instead of just seeing ESG as a cost, oh my God, a new regulation comes up.
But is it ESG or is it just good business? Is it good business to appeal to what your customers want?
ESG is good business. That's how I
ESG
see
is
it.
good business if you have sufficient customers. I'll give you another example. In our listed company, we have many restaurant business. Okay? I cannot mention a name, but there are restaurants where private equity is invested in them and they generate good returns. But it's definitely not ESG because they sell shark fins. And there are many people who like shark fins. And they continue to patronize and continue to grow the earnings. Investors are happy because it pays returns. Right? So it's definitely not ESG. So, you know, if you have a consumer that chooses to eat more shark fins, the investor are not going to say, no, I'm not going to invest. Because it's positive cash flow.
Well, there a reputational issue might appear in the future. So if you look at the long term, so in the short term that might work. But me as an investor, I would not particularly invest in them, even though they might be very profitable now, because I think in the future that might change.
Well, I think there's a big exposure to regulatory risk.
Yeah.
When shark fin
Right.
or shark hunting, which is used in Australia, gets banned. And so
then
you've built all this profit up and you've got this big customer base because everyone likes shark's fin, and overnight shark fishing's banned, there goes your business. So it's a regulatory, so you've got to look at, you know, so if I'm on the board of that company, I'm thinking this is a big risk. Do I really want to take this?
And you see, that's where it spun a whole new industry of advisory business where I'm also in. And you teach these people,
Me too.
right? You teach these people how to be sustainable in providing shark fins, right? By using technology, by how to be humane, right? How to grow synthetic shark fins. And there's a whole new industry. And where are we heading, right? Maybe I want to ask Yulin, right? You know, you send this, and you know, to me, there's a little bit of hypocrisy here. We're just pursuing this because the regulator wants it. The regulators are here, right? The investor wants it only if it is positive cash flow. But where are these leading to? Right? Are we very hypocritic when we say, yes, ESG is very important, but on the other hand, right, we are not doing any action as long as it is not positive cash flow to the shareholders.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So really thankful to SIAS for inviting us, and also to Mr. Gerald for inviting as well. And I really like this hotel room because it's very comfortable. I was just thinking that I should definitely hold more events here. It's very, very nice hotel. And then I was sat at the VIP table until I saw the VVIP table, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm missing out," you know. But you know, thanks so much for the question. But I don't think it is. We don't need to ask about these kind of questions anymore about who's right, who's wrong, is it hypocritical, is it not? Because I think right now we've already talked a lot about ESG and whether or not it's right or wrong, shark fins or not. You know, I think it's more around operationalizing it at the moment. We really simply do not have time to kind of like argue philosophically about what's right, what's wrong, shark's fin or not, hypocrisy or not. A lot of groundwork has already been done on giving you the kind of like guardrails and also a kind of map for you to follow. I want to make a point here because this is about board directors and it's also about investors. Investors, sophisticated directors who are initiated will know how to ask the right questions. Okay? So I think there was a point about directors just now, and then was it your point about the directors not knowing climate is on the agenda?
Yes,
I'm highly surprised.
But this comes from the global, Institute of Global Network of Directors Institute, and it's in the August survey in 2023.
So if it's a global report, then it must have some kind of averaging across jurisdictions. Okay, I will say this, right? Is that the first thing is that I took my words back. I took it back. When the SGX came up with a set of requirements that said that all directors will need to do mandatory training, I said, I'm not sure whether this is going to help. After that, I went up to Michael Teng and I said, you're right. This works. Because what this does, right, it initiates the minds of directors. And when you see it, you cannot unsee it. And mind you, directors, all of you who are on the board, many of you who are on boards of directors, you are very smart people, right? And you know how to call out what's a risk, what's an opportunity, and what's going to be beneficial for your strategy as well. And I have a hard time as a consultant. I have a very hard time. Because of this initiation that was done, they are now initiated, and they now read a lot. One time I was in front of a board director, he asked me a question, and then later I said the answer, and he said, you're right. And you know why he said I'm right? Because he just typed in ChatGPT, and he gave a response. Okay, it makes my work very, very tough. But that joke aside, right, it was not a joke actually, it was factual. It happened. But I have been very, very, very comforted and very encouraged by a board of directors going through the initiation process of understanding ESG, sustainability, slight difference there, and then asking me the right questions. And it's no more about philosophical debates. It's about questions such as, do I have the right type of sustainability-related risk and opportunities as it relates to impacting my prospects of a company in a short, medium, and long term across my value chain? What type of disclosures and data do I need? How do I operationalize my climate transition plan? And it makes my job really interesting, but it gets tougher along the way. So that's one point I want to say, okay, is that upskilling of directors actually work. It helps to ask the right type of questions. I'm very, very surprised about that it is actually low on the agenda on climate as it relates to directors, right? But maybe I can offer a different point of view. And I'm not saying this because I'm from PwC, but we also did a similar survey, and they did recognize, okay, that climate was on the top agenda. Why? Well, firstly, I think you cannot deny the fact, right, that there are physical risk issues at this point in time. There are, right? I had to, one of the companies asked me, I thought, Yulin, that you said that based on the IPCC report, there was an X amount of percentage that will occur in terms of flash floods in this certain part of the country. Then I said, that's what the signs say, but unfortunately it came earlier. Another study that we did, Australia, we said that, you know, this area will be water stressed and out of water by this date, this year. We were wrong. It came 2 years earlier. So I don't know what to say, right, than to say that these are all important issues. That's one. And the other area is that there's regulations that are coming up. And investors know this as well. That's why they set up the UNPRI, the GFANS, and so forth. So I would say that whilst we have a difference in terms of data points, right, The data point that I have shows that actually climate is on the agenda for various issues, actual physical risk and also transition risk as well. The other area I would say is that from our own study, the skill that is less of a skill for directors is about climate change. It's at the bottom. So the risks are at the top, but the skills are at the bottom. So you need to kind of like get this, together. And one of the key things is making sure that the directors are initiated. The second thing I would say is that for financial markets, there's no excuse right now. In the past, there was one standard called the GRI standard. It was issued in 1997. It's a good standard, but it is impact leaning. For financial markets, the key standard has already been set, and that is the International Sustainability Standards Board standard that looks into, as what Prue said, about prospects. It's about what investors are focused on. Cash flows, financial position, financial performance, how is it going to impact that? So I would recommend that in the journey for investors and also for board of directors, that they also look into these new standards. As I said, the guardrails and the roadmap has already been set. It is timely to also leverage on this and start to operationalize on these matters as well. So just my 2 cents worth from an accountant.
I think Yulin is correct. She is working on that 5% where this global network of directors institute are saying that this 5% of the directors group are serious about climate action. The point is, how do I grow this 5% to 50%, right? And I think, Roger, you have your views on this too, right? From UK.
Yes. I think one of the problems from a board perspective, because coming from the Institute of Directors, that's
Yes.
how we're looking at it.
And you contributed to that survey too.
Yes, I was involved. And I mean, Prue, I think, alluded to this slightly. I mean, I and many people in the director community have something of a problem with the concept of ESG. And as an organising principle. Now, there's a well-known finance professor at London Business School called Alex Edmonds. He made what I think quite provocative but quite accurate statements. And he basically said, ESG is both incredibly important and nothing special. And what he meant by that was that the sort of factors which come under the ESG umbrella are incredibly important drivers of long-term value creation for companies. They're this kind of intangible drivers, and Prue was talking about the fact intangible assets now dominate. Well, these factors under ESG are the intangible drivers, but they're nothing special because there are other intangible drivers of value creation as well, like the innovative capability of a company, the management skill of a company, the culture of a company. And I think perhaps this is, from a board perspective, ESG has just become too much of a sort of an alphabet soup of different miscellaneous issues, which boards now feel they have to sort of tick the box and look at together in order to comply or do the right thing. When actually the way they should be thinking of them is what are the key drivers of long-term value creation? What is actually material to my business that is going to drive value creation? Don't think of it in terms of ESG. Think of it in terms of these commercially relevant factors. I think that is a way that seems more relevant to the board community if it's couched in that way.
No, I think you have a point, which the survey also say many boards, in fact 2/3 of them, believe that we must put focus on those key drivers that has impact on long-term strategy. But where I'm coming at is we have to introduce practicality in this whole equation. Take Europe as an example. Because of the Ukraine war, energy cost has gone up a lot. And we know that no matter how we want to move into clean energy, 80% of the energy today are still on fossil fuel, right? So you have this dilemma: do I start my nuclear reactor, right? Or do I allow the bitter winter to hit a lot more people? You look at what the UK government has done. The immediate needs to provide for warmth in the winter is very important.
Yeah.
And I got to do it, right? And I have to subsidize fuel costs.
And just look at what's happened over the last couple of years. Actually, the so-called ESG stocks have underperformed the market. And you have, companies like BP, big oil companies that say, we're going to actually slow down our transition to a kind of net zero situation. And the share price outperforms.
Yes.
So, they're having... they're receiving mixed messages, and the board of Shell was actually recently sued in London by an NGO called Client Earth, an activist, saying the board of Shell, because you're still continuing to focus on fossil fuels, you are not fulfilling your duties as a director. Therefore, we are suing you to hold you liable. Well, the courts actually threw that out. They said it's up to the board of directors to determine what's in the best interests of the company. And it's very difficult to say that you're mismanaging the duties of the company when your share price is significantly outperforming. So it's these sort of facts of life. Can make it difficult, I think, for companies to sort of prioritise so-called ESG factors above everything else.
Well, that's why I still think it's going to come back through the lens of the investor. And I think I think we need to come back to the G. As I said this before when I first started speaking, that if you get a competent board with a diversity of skills and experience, in particularly core industry skills, because I remember back in Australia in the early 2000s there were some big collapses, and you looked at the independent element of the board and none had experience in that particular... The banks, we had disasters with one of the big banks, but were there any independent directors with banking skills on there? The answer was no. So you've got to have core industry skills and diversity of other skills on the board. The board's biggest role is to appoint the CEO. So that person heads up management. So therefore they set up the strategy and the culture and everything else. So that comes back to the board. It's a G issue. Mm-hmm. And I think you've really got to get the G right, and you get then that leads to a strong management team, an informed management team that understands what the risks and opportunities are in terms of these other issues, whether it's environmental or social. I don't think it's rocket science. I'm sure I'm not the smartest person in the room here by a long way, but it's not rocket science. And everybody just seems to complicate it by saying ESG, sustainability, ESG. And coming back to Eric, the example you were talking about before, that's about someone really understanding the psychology of people. It's using psychology to grow the business. To say, I just don't think saying it's ESG. It's someone really smart. It's a bit like an example when I went to my first sustainability conference. As a supermarket deciding they had to get rid of 10% of their fresh fruit because it was odd-shaped. So they decided to sell it for half price or quarter of the price. So that increased sales and reduced waste. And that was ESG. No, it's not. It's just good business. So it is good business. And I think that's how people should be thinking, and that's how boards should be thinking, instead of getting a big brain fog around ESG. What is it? What boxes do I have to tick? Produce a 200-page sustainability report that frankly no one reads. And so it's good business. And out of that good business comes doing good. It's not doing good first, it's out of good business, and doing good comes out of that.
I mean, the term ESG was first put forward, I think, in about 2005 by the United Nations, wasn't it, in a report, as a way for investors to kind of organise, the way they looked at companies, but it was never intended to be applied to boards, because actually the elements of ESG need to be broken down, disaggregated by companies, and looked at in much more depth.
Yeah, I just spent the last 20 minutes pointing out why it is on the board agenda, because it comes down to risk-adjusted returns. It's core to valuation and to value creation. And as a director, I'm a steward, as a collective of the board, of those assets. I join the board and they consist of whatever, and then when I leave, I'm on the board for 7 or 8 years, it should be in a better place. And if you ignore those non-financial issues, I don't think you're discharging your stewardship responsibilities.
Yeah, Yuli?
Sorry, if I just chime in, right? And I'm trying to get the conversation away from, some of philosophical issues, right? But I actually do think that, boards are boards, right? They're leaders. So I'll make one point, is that there is a scenario under the NGFS, which is basically climate scenarios, and one of it was an orderly transition, and the other one is a disorderly transition. My own personal opinion, just personal, is we are at a disorderly transition right now as it relates to skill sets. There's just too few people in society that knows how to do sustainability, decarbonization properly, effectively. So that's one point I'll make. The other point I'll make is that again, back to my point, we need to start talking about solutions and move away from philosophical debates, and also points around, if I might respectfully say, right, things about saying things like, there's a war here, war there, there's so much hypocrisy and contradictions. It is also very seductive to actually use information such as, my share price has increased nonetheless, being such a pollutant, but I'm still increased my share price. I think this is a very seductive option to go by because that's only short term. We must look at it from a long-term perspective. So I would, ask my fellow, panelists, right? What is it that we can do as leaders, as board directors, as investors, to really operationalize, a much better world? How do we do this?
So Yulin has a point, that is the need for education, the training. And Prue has just, in the speech, make it very clear that the ESG consideration should be deliberated at the board level when you consider your strategic options. And I think every board has the responsibility to look at their business model and see how the environmental and social impact could change that business model, because there's existential risk. And by doing that, you're taking the first step to operationalize, right? And I think, Eric, in this area, you're in Nordic and you teach this and you interact with the industries there. How do you see the boards are operationalizing, this doing good goals? We don't call it ESG, like what Roger is saying, right? No, let's look at long-term, right? Capitalism, doing good here.
Well, I'm gonna give an example to answer your question and to show you how dangerous it is to use ESG and introduce it to the board. Like, this is a separate thing you have to discuss. So here we have a gaming company, one of the biggest gaming companies in the world, Activision Blizzard. And in June 2021, they issued their first ESG report. And the board, it said the board's responsible for the ESG. I was very happy because I started to be a gamer again because of Corona. So I was looking at the ESG report and it looked good. It had all the information there. It had the E, the S, and the G. And the information was based on, let's say, data they received from the company, from management. Customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction surveys, etc. And it looked great. July 2021, the company is sued by California for sexual harassment. And all of a sudden it came out, it wasn't so good at all. So here we have the board, and the board came out with a statement that they said, we are transparent and we feel that we receive all the information necessary. No. The thing is, what Prue said basically is, they don't understand the business. So here you have a board very far away from the business, even further away from the industry and the community. They did not understand a thing about what's actually happening in the gaming industry. The addiction to games, that the employees were not happy. And still they came out with this report. Why? Because all of a sudden they were forced to do something on the ESG and boom, there they went. Completely wrong. It backfired. Share price dropped dropped even more significantly when it came out that the CEO already knew about this for 5 years, but the board was never informed. Now they are taken over by Microsoft because they became very cheap. This is the problem of the whole ESG discussion. If you don't see it as good business, this is a board that failed. Why? They did not understand the company and the industry very well. That board performed badly. If you just tell them, listen, you don't understand your business, you cannot do anything, then they would have come out with probably a better report, or at least had a discussion with management that something had to change if they understood that business.
No, this call for a mindset shift, because in this particular example, if they follow the GRI and the disclosure standards and they do exactly just that, you end up this, because they're asking the wrong set of questions.
Yes.
Their question is, how do I comply?
Yes.
But if you ask another set of questions, how do I do good? So that we don't have gamers who get addicted. We don't have gamers who are abusers, right? Then a different set of answers come out. So how do you encourage the board to go beyond the complying standards and ask those right sets of questions on how to do good?
Yeah, but we should also not forget the fact that there has been a backlash against ESG fairly recently. And this is why I think, where business, you as a board of directors, you have to tread a fine line in terms of how you're going to get involved in certain issues. You may want to do good. It may be an admirable thing to do, and it may well be in the interest of your business to do that. But there's a need to be careful there as well. We're seeing at the moment, all of the problems in the Middle East. How should boards pass comment on that? Should they do that or not? We had this quite a high-profile case in the UK where the CEO of a major bank basically had to resign because it was determined that actually the bank had refused a banking account to someone who was involved in politics, who was somewhat on the right of politics. And people in the bank effectively didn't like this person. They thought that this person was a populist and a kind of rabble-rouser, and so they didn't give them a bank account. That then resulted in a political backlash against the organisation. It's tricky territory here.
So I just want to add a little bit about the question around how do we, make sure that as boards or even investors, right, we get down to the right type of issues that matter. So, you're quite right to say that ESG, comprise of components which are across environmental, social, and governance. Governance components, or loosely called material topics, right? Now under ISSB is called sustainability-related risk and opportunities. The ones in the S and the ones in the G are very much table stakes. So they're things which are very common to you, which you understand very well: cybersecurity, data protection, governance, culture, and so on. So those are kind of like table stakes. I feel that through my journey in sustainability, the ones that hasn't been really tackled very well, or is a little bit new to people, a bit more complex as well, is actually the environmental side. So I think there's also room for tackling some of the issues across ESG, although many of them under S and G may look familiar. The G ones are the ones that, the E ones are the ones that need but significant scrutiny on that. Just another point I just wanted to highlight, right, about standards, because you mentioned that you follow the standard, the GRI standard, but yet things happen. I don't think we should poo-poo standards, right? Standards are standards. They've gone through a rigorous process to become a standard. But I think that standards are also principle-based, right? Would you poo-poo IFRS Foundation standards? We wouldn't, right? You would take the principles that are there and you make it your own. So I would say that, I don't know, sometimes things happen, right? But as board directors, as also investors, which are invested into companies, I think they should, as quite rightly said by my fellow panelists here, really identify the areas from an environmental, social, and governance perspective, right, that really impact the prospects of the company from a short, medium, long term across the value chain. The one other thing I want to say is that whilst it's more financial, the purpose of a company sometimes is not only that. Companies sometimes also, they want to create impact. So you must also have another guardrail or some kind of mechanism for you to say, what are the areas that I want to create impact in? And also, how do I measure it as well? So just two points. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'm going to read some of these comments coming from the floor so that we can address it as a whole. The first is most investors do not have the horizon and the willingness to wait for long-term positive results from companies, especially the mid and small caps. How do we balance this? Now, there's a similar question. I do agree with the moderator that acceptance of ESG is not a given. It is still very much seen to be mandatory driven. I think that the corporate world has not fully bought into the ESG if truth be told. And the third one, very similar. How does board balance short-term financial goals to address long-term ESG concerns and promote sustainable practices? And what governance mechanisms need to be in place to align the two? So maybe we start with Prue, because you have actually provided the answer for these three questions. Very similar. It's about the governance, which you emphasize. Yeah.
Yeah, as I go,
Yeah.
I'll say again, I think getting the board right is
All right.
critical. In terms of balancing short-term and long-term goals, I mean, that does depend on the business. If you're a mining company and you might have a 60-year horizon on a particular mine or a particular commodity, you're absolutely looking at the longer term. If for a tech company where tech is changing all the time, your horizon might be shorter, because if you take a long-term horizon with a particular product, it might be completely out of date within 2 or 3 years' time. So the balancing of the short and long term, I think, is very industry dependent. And again, coming to governance, utilising committees, having cross-committee membership is really important. I can refer you to a report that was prepared by the Australian Prudential Regulator, APRA, around the largest bank, CBA, that had major governance failings, and there was a real lack of communication at the board, particularly between the committees. Yes, you had audit, nomination and remuneration and a sustainability committee, but there was very little cross-membership. So reports just went to the board, and particularly from the audit, none of the audit committee members sat on the other boards. Now you look at Australian company, the committee structure, there's a lot of cross-membership. As I said before, it's a very good way of utilising the particular skill sets. And boards really should be utilising skills matrix. What are the core skills that a company needs? What are the nice to haves? And then what are the skills that you probably won't get on the board? Climate change is, having a climate change expert. Very few boards would have a climate change expert, and a climate change expert doesn't necessarily translate to a good board director who needs to have an inquiring mind and be able to cover a number of topics. So then, and that comes back to the education piece. How is the board informed independently from management on these issues? Cyber would be one, climate change. There would be a lot of issues. So that comes back to that board education piece.
Yeah, that's very important. Yulin, you have a lot to contribute on this area, because you are actually working with, those companies who believe in this, right? And you push for the directors training. I mean, you were saying that there's a lot more training to be done, which I agree, because that is where you can, accelerate the mindset shift, right? What more can we do?
I don't push for directors training, okay, but I believe in training. Yeah.
Believe in training.
I believe in upskilling, and I believe in education. I wanted to just, support Prue's point about board diversity and skill set. I mean, actually, I find that a very simple way. I mean, it depends, right? If you are an energy company, you need to transition. I guess you need expertise in transitioning, right? M&A and all that stuff. So I think it is quite important that we do have. She mentioned a great idea, which is a skills and experience matrix, right? And we should, and this should be aligned to the needs of the organization. and the board, should reflect that. I do empathize, right, that there are not many climate and sustainability experts. There are very few and far in between. And then they also would not be, sometimes would not be able to satisfy the attributes of being a director as well. So they're very specific. What I have seen other organizations do, including in Singapore, is that they do set up a sustainability board committee, and this will be chaired by a board member, but the members within the team, right, can also be invited, which are not on the board itself, or they can have a sustainability advisory committee as well, which does not require the individual to actually, kind of discharge his duties as a board member, but to discharge his or her duties, as an expert. So that's one practical way to get around this, right, issue. Yeah.
Roger, what is your take? What more can we do?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies have set targets, specifically for when they're going to get to net zero, which was a useful first step. But now I think a lot of the emphasis is moving to developing credible transition planning. And because that's, I suppose that there is still a gap out there between companies' ultimate objectives and getting there from where they are now. In the UK, the regulatory authorities in the UK have just published a kind of a template, a kind of gold standard for how you actually create a transition plan. And that I think that whole area of transition planning now needs to come onto focus, and we need people on the board who can scrutinise that and oversee that in a robust manner. So that as far as the E is concerned, I think that's the next key step.
Eric?
Well, the more I think about it, as a board member myself, I see ESG basically as an opportunity and not as a cost. It's just, you look at the business, you look at the company you're in, you look at your industry, and if you are an energy company, there are a lot of new opportunities, and you have to understand these opportunities and go there. That's material to you. If you are a gaming company, there are a lot of issues in the gaming society and addiction, and that's more like the E. It's an opportunity to basically say, well, we deal with this, and investors will like that, and gamers will like it, because if you look at the gaming community, they really pay attention, and they are loyal. So that's very important to you, and very material. It's all about what's material to you, and it falls either in ES or ENS, and you focus on that as a growth opportunity. And then you get a completely different discussion instead of, here are some rules, guys, we need a report. And then the board is not going to write anything, so some other people are going to write it, and the board goes through it, and what you get is a corporate document that no one's going to read, too long, overlapping. And I actually, at a company, I was a board member, I asked, I look at this report, I see a lot of overlap. Do you guys talk to each other? And they said no. So they all gave information. There was one guy collecting it. I don't know, he shaked and baked something, and there it went. 200 pages of shit, maybe. So that's not sustainable at all.
Yeah.
So let's view and let's look at ESG as an opportunity in your industry, in your company, for growth. And all of a sudden, you get a different discussion.
Yes, I think
Which is much more
the way we ask questions.
Look, I agree with you, and I don't think ESG should be in a separate report. In Australia, you're required to do what's called the operating financial review. All of that information about how you're treating the gaming, if there are issues, we've got management things in, should all, because it's all linked back to the whole operations of the company. Yeah. One of the good things about S1 of ISSB, it is that it is asking for material non-financial information to be disclosed at the same time, and that hopefully, and then companies will be forced to do that narrative about linking the two, but having the separate report that comes out months after. I mean, I've been reviewing these for the last 10 years, and I've read one annual report that's come out, a couple of months after year end. Sustainability report comes out 6 months later. It doesn't even appear to come from the same company. They're so disconnected. It's got to happen at the same time. It's got to be totally within the organisation, and that's when you're going to see the opportunities and identify the risks that need to be managed.
yeah, the narrative and the financials should connect.
Absolutely.
And that's important. And they should realize that most people are narrative driven. There are only a few investors that really understand all these financials and are data driven. But you can then easily see where a company goes wrong. When the narrative and the financials don't connect, that's, by the way, there was a question that was asked before the lunch break. What do you look at when you invest in a company? Well, you look at the financials and the narrative, and if there's a disconnect, don't invest.
Yeah, right. Now, there's a set of questions on trust. Since we are on this subject on trust, then I'll ask them, right? The first question, they're all together the same. On being hypocritical, how does the company ensures that a board and the management practice what they preach, right? So the second one is very similar. How can we ensure, validate the credibility of ESG framework mentioned by the companies, right? And here we have this morning the GOH said that the auditors are very important in ensuring that the financial reporting can be relied upon. What is the view of the panel in relation to assurance of ESG reporting? They're very similar, and this has to do with credibility and trust, right? Maybe Roger, start first. Yeah.
Yes, well, the first comment was, I think, what can the company do to make sure the board and the management, walk the talk?
That's right.
It's, the company is not this separate thing. It's, the directors are there to make sure that happens. They are the conscience of the company. So the directors, this is the challenge. They have to make sure that the management walk the talk.
Yes.
I do think, we're moving, I think, there's a big evolution which is needed in the auditing and accounting profession to move from a world of just looking at financial information and providing assurance on that to providing assurance on sustainability information, intangible information, the culture of the organisation, not just external auditors, internal auditors as well. So that's got to happen. Get ready, accounting firms. You perhaps need to change the type of people that you have working for you.
Sure, right. Eric?
Well, I think to build trust is all about, okay, let's bring in the communication now.
Sure.
It's all about communication, and that's where you can see where the company is actually walking the talk or not. Most reports are like the Activision Blizzard. It was just, you could easily see. It takes you 2 minutes to see that the report did not match reality.
Yeah.
Just you go online and you see what people and the community thinks about that company, and then you read the report. Well, how can it say that they treat their employees fairly when I see on social media that that's not the case? So if you just look around and see what kind of information you find about the company, I think then you learn a lot, and the company should realize that communication is very important, and that's the point we made. We should not have all these separate reports, but just communicate clearly the financials and the non-financials and get the narrative right. And one thing you can do at board level, what we introduced, is because the board is more like a, we get constant information, but like we have a board meeting and boom, a lot of information. The board meeting, boom, there's a lot of information. I think we should have more continuity. So if you tell management to just write what is material, and that document is basically work in progress for all the other board meetings, you can see where they change. It's just 30 pages, and it's much easier to understand what the company is doing, where they're at, what's material to them, where we have to change, what is disruptive, what is a growth opportunity, and the board meetings become a real pleasure instead of going through the agenda items like a Formula One racing car.
Yeah. Yulin?
Okay, so firstly I'll go back to the two questions before, where they said that, some people are not bought in about ESG. I'm surprised, again, with great surprise, I'm on that comment. Look, many countries have already set net zero, including Singapore. And how are we going to get to net zero? 3 big parts. Number 1, government, decarbonize. Number 2, companies, decarbonize. And number 3, the rest of us. So if the government is already setting net zero, that is the direction that the country has taken and countries have taken. And yet, within these quarters of society, right, we feel it's still not a norm. I think that we better do a better job. Okay, that's where the communication comes in. On the two questions on, I think there was one about who polices the standards or the frameworks. Well, they're standards, right? Of course they will have to go through lots of rigor. Likewise, when standards come out in terms of the IFRS standards, it's not something new to us. In the same fashion, ISSB standard, the GRI standards, they're standards. Okay, and they're well reviewed, looked through many times as well. In fact, the ISSB has the support of IOSCO. So that's one response to that, right? And then I think the point around, how can directors walk the talk and everything, I totally agree with Richard's point on that, so I agree with you. On assurance, sat over there on the right-hand side of the room is, PwC's assurance ESG leader for Asia. She has a work cut out for her. She has a work cut out for her because there's, firstly, a new standard has come out. The ISSA 5000, right, has come out as a standard for the purposes of looking into trust around sustainability information. Why is this unique, or how is this different from the past? Firstly, and I'm really excited about the standard, right, and I'm sure Moily is as well, is that it tries to be more relevant to sustainability information as it stands. Sustainability information is more exciting than, personal point of view, than financial, but also just as important. It has not only quantitative aspects of it, qualitative aspects of it as well. At the same time, it has forward-looking information too, scenarios and all that. So I think that the powers that be, the global governance powers that be, have come out with an accompaniment to the sustainability reporting standards for building trust, and that's the ISSA 5000 standard. And I look forward to the benefit that it will bring as well to building trust in sustainability reporting standards. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Yuling. Yeah.
And I can see we're out of time. Just one thing that I just wanted to add with the ISSB coming in and the S1 and S2 standards, with the conversations that I've been having with boards and also senior management teams, is at the moment the CFO is responsible for the IFRS accounting standards and ISSB is part of IFRS, and because the two are going to be linked, it's going to come under the remit of the CFO, which I think is going to really improve reporting, because for some companies it's in the marketing and PR area, and that's why we're getting that disconnect. So I think with these new reporting standards, the ISB ones anyway, that will move into the remit of the CFO in that reporting suite.
Yeah, that's right. So I have to call an end to this very lively panel. I'm sure when you are listening to this, you realize this world is indeed very complex. Why I say that? Because you were here, in this panel, very different views, very different diverse views, right? And that's exactly what this world is about. And here, in this journey to embrace ESG action, based on what the panel have said, it is important that you read the standards, understand the standards, because it gives you the guiding framework on what you need to do. I think more importantly is have some common sense in the application of the ESG actions, right? Make sure that this is discussed thoroughly. Make sure that this actually get down to what you can achieve and don't overpromise, which is what we learned in the morning, okay? And make sure you check what you write versus what is the reality, right? And this is not a single person's job, not a board of directors' job. It encompasses the entire organization, the firm. Every employee have to be part of this, right? So with this, I would like to invite Roger to do a closing for this very exciting one-day conference on building trust. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm just going to sort of summarize what I think, well, for me at least, have been some of the highlights of today and some of the kind of key takeaways for me. I mean, this conference has all been around the theme of building trust through effective corporate governance. And I thought David Gerald really emphasised this point right at the beginning of the conference when he said, look, if you're operating in a system with controlling shareholders, with significant family ownership, then if you're going to be a minority shareholder, a minority investor in that kind of system, you've got to have trust, because actually you're pretty vulnerable. You could be exploited. There needs to be good corporate governance in place to enable you to have sufficient trust in order to invest. Then we heard from Ravi Menon, who I thought did a brilliant job in laying out different ways in which we can try to build trust in an economy and in a business system. And you may remember his kind of very catchy threefold recipe for building trust. It was do well, do right, and do good. And I think we explored each of those principles in the panel that I moderated this morning around building trust. And then, if you remember, we had that very interesting presentation from Professor Mahbubani, who, for me, emphasised that one of the important ways in which you build trust is by actually getting together around a table with people, engaging with them on a face-to-face basis. And he pointed to the experience of ASEAN as a mechanism by which trust in this part of the world has really been developed. So I thought that was very interesting. And then we came to talking about technology, how technology is impacting on governance. And, Eric, in your presentation, I loved the way in which you were talking about how boards can become more forward-looking, have no agenda meetings and ask what-if questions. That I think is an essential takeaway for all of us. And I couldn't agree more with this point about the fact that boards need training. We can't just take it for granted that people who sit on boards are the finished article in terms of knowing everything that's needed to be known in order to run a company, essentially. They need to have education in technology, they need to have education in ESG, as well as all the other core topics. And then, of course, we come to this final panel around ESG, which I think has been fascinating. And for me, the key takeaways out of this are that ESG is not something that should be treated as some niche topic. It's good business. It's just not. You consider ESG as part of the process of doing good business as a board and actually as an investor. And you need to focus on issues which are material. Don't just go through a kind of tick the box exercise covering everything that you think ESG is composed of, just because you think that's the right thing to do. Focus on what is material, and also when you do this, be authentic. There's no point in trying to be something that you're not. Engage on these ESG issues, but do so in a way where you mean it, and where what you say is true, and when you're not going to be exposed within 5 minutes for greenwashing or making false claims about your organisation. So I think, it's been an incredibly rich conference covering all of these areas. I'm really glad we've spoken about the issue of trust, because it is, as I said earlier, I think it's something that's taken for granted, and we don't actually think about it enough. But it so much underpins business, investment, directorship, and pretty much everything in society. So it's incredibly important. And I think as far as corporate governance in Singapore is concerned, an organisation which really does contribute to the building of trust is SIAS. So well done to you. Thank you.